Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Arts Governance Now More Than Ever with Patrick Moriarty. My name is Kevin and I look forward to hosting today's Creative Connections webinar. I would like to start by firstly acknowledging the traditional custodians and owners of the countries throughout Australia, including where you are today. I myself are coming from the lands of the Gamaragal people in the Eora Nation. I pay my deep respect to elders past, present and future. If you would like, please share the country that you are coming from in the chat room with us today. It's so great to have you here. On screen currently is a PowerPoint with some text to introduce our session, with some video boxes, of course, within the Zoom feature. I am the host, a man in my early 40s, with fair skin, brown hair and brown eyes, wearing a grey jumper in front of a black backdrop. Welcome to today's session, everyone. As you hopefully now know, that these sessions are designed and produced to provide some support and resources and an opportunity to learn during this specific time. I'm again so encouraged by so many of you taking the time to learn and to share your thoughts together with us throughout the series. And we invite you to continue to join us. Before I hand over to Patrick, just a quick reminder that there is a fantastic program that our team here at the Australia Council is managing called Future Form, and those applications are closing on Friday. So if you have not been aware of it, hopefully there might be some few moments that you can find to look into potentially applying. And if you have not seen our webinar that we did last week with the lead facilitator, Tara, you can access that on our website as well. Then, believe it or not, today is our 26th webinar that we've been delivering as part of this series. And we are sort of halfway now since our commencement on the 1st of April, and that seems like such a long time ago. But we are just amazed that we've now had close to 6,000 of you joining these webinars since we've started. So later this week, we really would like you to share us your thoughts by completing a midway survey that will inform our work and to allow us to understand the impact of this particular series having for you. So a couple of housekeepings again. We have closed captioning that's available, and if that's not activated, please do so in the feature in Zoom, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Also a reminder that today's session will be recorded, and that recording will be sent to everyone who is registered post the session. And we will be doing a short Q&A at the end, so feel free to enter any questions that you might have to Patrick. Now, I have known Patrick for a little while, and he is a governance guru. So try and come up with maybe the most difficult governance question for him. It's a challenge. Okay, so on the matter, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our guest for today. Currently on screen is again a PowerPoint slide with some text to introduce our guest speaker. The title of the slide introduces Patrick Moriarty. Next to his headshot, a square cropped image of a man with fair skin, light grey hair with smiling to the camera. He's wearing a black jacket and a white collared shirt in front of a grey background. For the past 20 years, Patrick has led to the governance program of an organisation called Our Community. And hopefully you are aware of this fantastic organisation. The Institute of Community Directors under the organisation have been partnering with the Australia Council for the past number of years for delivering a arts-specific arts governance program, and that's how we have met Patrick. So Patrick is now semi-retired, and he is also the managing partner of Strategic Australia Communications, focusing on providing strategic and governance advice to not-for-profit boards. And we're so pleased to have Patrick here with us today to unpack really what's happening right now in terms of arts governance, and particularly the role of the board in the moment, in the environment that we are finding ourselves in these uncertain times. And also moving into a creative recovery phase, with the role of the board in this space. So it's so great to have you here, Patrick, and thank you so much for spending some time with us. And I'll broadly sort of hand over to you now to guide us through a bit of some thinking this afternoon. So I think you've got some slides to share with us, and I'll hand over to you, Pat.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As with Kevin's introduction, I would also like to acknowledge all First Nations people on whose lands we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It always was, always is and always will be Aboriginal land, seas and waters. Here I am in my happy space. I'm at the edge of my kitchen bench. I've boiled up a lovely bolognese for today, so I can still smell that. I'm wearing a beautiful check shirt. I'm slightly greyer and slightly older than the headshot that Kevin placed up before us before. And in the background on the wall, I've got a lovely Amy Napangati Nelson dot painting of bush plums, which is a utopian piece of work. It's lovely, bright colours. And hopefully that's just like your boards, nice and bright at the moment. It's now been a few months since COVID-19 really shook the world. And arguably, of all the sectors, particularly in Australia, the arts is the hardest hit. We've seen some boards and some board members throw up their hands and become chicken littles and say it's just all too hard. We've seen others hand-controlled management, basically just washing their hands of it. And what I really want to discuss with you today is why at this particular point in time, governance is really so critical. And I want to look at what boards should be doing, and in some cases, hopefully should have already done. For some organisations, near-term survival is the only agenda item. Others are peering through the fog of uncertainty, thinking about how to position themselves once the crisis has passed and things return to normal. The question is, what will normal look like? While no one can say how long the crisis will last, what we find on the other side will not look like the normal of recent years. Now, you might think those words were written with COVID-19 in mind. They actually weren't. They were written about 11 years ago amid the last global financial crisis by one of McKinsey Consulting's managing partners, Ian Davis. And I think they ring true today. But if anything, they understate the reality of what the world is currently facing. And I suppose my key message for today is really getting you to think that now is not the time to bunker down. Now is the time for cool heads, clear planning, and looking at the best way forward. So I'm going to make some assumptions, and it would be interesting for us to test that. But maybe, Laura, before I do that, I'd really like to get a feel of what and where people are actually coming from in terms of their role with the board. So Laura, could you put up a poll, and maybe if I could ask people to respond to that, please? And we'll come back in a couple of minutes so that people can actually see who and what people are coming from today. So if I just move on to my next slide while we're waiting for that, the assumptions that I've made relate to what I think boards should have been doing in the last 3-4 months. And that's that our purpose, our reason for being, our mission statement, if you like, is still relevant and still current. In our Australia Council Governance Program, I think we use 3 questions to really test that. And I'll share those 3 with you. If we didn't exist, who would miss us? If we didn't exist, what would be lost? And then maybe looking at it from a different angle, if we didn't exist, what would be gained? So maybe what we're testing there is really, are we still relevant? Are we still current? And is our purpose really what we want it to be? We've also seen in the crisis some board members disengaging with the organisations and in effect leaving management and staff to fill that breach. Now that is really quite dangerous, and there really does need to be clarity around the roles, the relationships and the decision-making process that we're actually undertaking as a board and as an organisation, even if it actually is different in the current crisis. Now, what can occur is that the board does bunker down, and really now is not the time for that. In crisis of all different sorts, it is those organisations that are more prepared to take risks that achieve great outcomes. Now is the time to clearly and identify and engage with their key stakeholders and to keep them updated on your intentions. Even if the message is as simple as, we're monitoring the situation on a day-to-day process, and at this stage, our best plans are this. And be prepared to adapt and change your plans. We've seen in Victoria this week that that situation is extremely fluid, and what we were expecting last week has now changed. So what is the impact of that? What's our new expectation? Who do we need to support? And what really is our priority at this particular point in time? And be creative. Decision-making in this context might require broader consultation and engagement, not tighter. So boards bunkering down and assuming that they have all the knowledge in the room is not the best way for boards to act. So who could help us, not who has helped us. So maybe, Laura, if we can look briefly at sharing those results, if they've come in yet. So great, we've got a fairly good spread of some board members. We've got a fairly significant number of management and staff members. So in terms of that, today isn't solely for boards. And I think I've really tried to highlight the fact that in a crisis, it really is a team that is going to help us get through this. So boards just sitting in isolation thinking that they know it all. Management trying to impose solutions on staff and on boards is not the great way to go. So really what we want to look at is a broader engagement to make sure we've got better knowledge for really what is a key element of a board's legal obligations, and that's to make informed decisions. And I think really at this time, where information is imprecise, it's really about trying to get hold of a number of options. So I'll move into the next slide. So one of the things I wish more boards would do at least twice a year is to sit back and look at something that is quite easy to do, and that's to look at the environment that you're actually operating in. And to do this, many organisations use what is called a pestle analysis. I can tell that I'm getting old because when I was in uni, it was the step. So of course, we now have 2 more additions to that. And increasingly, we're seeing organisations call it the e-pestle and adding an ethical element to that pestle acronym. So what does the pestle stand for? It allows us to look at what is changing in our political environment? What is changing in the economic environment? What is changing socially that is going to make an impact on us? What is going to change technologically? What is likely or has changed in the legal/regulatory environment? And the final E is for the actual physical environment. Are we in the middle of storms? Are we in the middle of droughts? What is the impact of the environment on our operating environment? So it might be as simple as the capacity to maybe convert to battery power or solar power, or it could be as strong as making sure that travel commitments are actually more green. So there's many ways that gives us capacity. And what I really would have hoped is that organisations would have seen what has the last 3 months meant to as it relates to that, and then start to look at what is our best guess on what is likely to occur in the near future on each of those elements, because that gives us a setting from which we can actually start to plan some scenarios. So moving into that next element, I've sort of sat back and reflected on how can the board start to get ahead of what is likely to occur. And I've read a number of criticisms of arts organisations where in effect the first thing that boards did was cut staff. Now, whether you agree or disagree with that, what was the basis on which they made those decisions? So really, I came back to the artistic vibrancy framework that the Australia Council has developed. And I thought it gives us a framework from which to make sure that we are hitting every trigger point that really our arts organisations are involved with. So there's the actual art that we do. There's the artists that create and develop that work. There's the audiences that we need to engage with. There's the broader communities in which we operate. And the final point that we really must advocate strongly for is the arts actually lead to a vibrant society and culture. So in thinking through those elements and trying to think ahead of what we could do, I sort of came to a grid type arrangement where I've got those 5 elements down one side of a grid. And then I've started to look at, okay, what are we doing to support great art today? What are we doing to support great artists today? How are we engaging with the audiences? How are we engaging with broader community? And how are we contributing today to a more vibrant society and culture? And I just thought we could then start to move that out to, okay, what are our intents in the next 3 months? Then, how would that look like in 6 months? And then finally, what would it look like in 12 months' time? Now, I'm recognising that you mightn't be able to hit every element in every part of that grid. But what I'm suggesting is you should be at least investigating what are we going to do for each of those elements in each of those time points. I think looking out 12 months at today's level is actually a fairly significant time period. Coming back 3 months, even if we take the situation that I alluded to previously around Victoria and what had occurred and we were expecting last week as compared to the announcements that were made on Sunday. Now, that gives us a capacity as a board to look at the framework, revise it, but still consider the key elements so that we don't just react, we actually think about the outcomes that we're actually contributing to and how the decisions we are making make an impact on those elements. So if I move on, the next bit is really one that I think is critical. What we've tended to see over the years of working on the Australia Council's governance program is a lot of organisations in effect complaining that boards have become risk averse. So there is a very big difference between risk aware and risk averse. So what I would do is I would create a list of all of the possible scenarios based on our previous grid, our previous analysis around the pestle, and I start to look at them and start to evaluate them based on those two elements that we always know relate to risk. And that's the probability or likelihood of them occurring. And then if they were to occur, what would the impact be going from low to high? And I then start to map those scenarios so that I can start to consider which ones are more likely and which ones could we take a risk with. Which ones would that be just too much of a risk? So in effect, going back to our board and our organisation together as a team, having a clear understanding of the different range of risks we've got and our own appetite for taking those risks on different elements. So I might be a lot more conservative with the financial risks, but I might actually take a more significant risk with a program that might be trying to encourage artists to be more involved. So I start to balance those off, and then we start to make decisions based on our best understanding of the situations. And I think to help support those discussions, it really is about today, what is the most important thing for us? It's also about thinking about what we haven't considered. So what might we be missing? How might things unfold from here? And where could we influence now so that could pay off later? So really thinking through those and working together as a team to try and get those things coming forward. So then we start to look at contingency plans for each scenario. So in effect, separate those plans that outline the actions you need to take in case the risks you identified earlier occur. So taking that Victoria example as a really good one, our scenario might have been that we were going to get back up and operating probably towards the end of July. Our probability was relatively high, I would have suggested. And then we've started to move into a preparation phase and started to break those down. And what does the element for getting up and running start to look like? And what is our response to that? Now, our response might be completely different today as compared to what it was last Sunday. And I think what we've got to be able to do is think of, well, okay, if there was a relatively high probability that we were going to be up and running again, what if that doesn't occur? What would our response be in that context? So that we're not suddenly stuck out on a limb and have to come back and completely reinvent all of our strategy. So in effect, I'd like you to think of it as being what ifs. What if we get a significant outbreak of COVID-19 again? What if all of our artists who have previously been working with us are no longer available and we're going to need to replace them? So all of those what ifs give us a capacity to start to plan ahead so that in effect that does occur, I can start to pull open the top drawer and pull out a strategy that might be applicable at that point in time. So really it's about being a lot more agile and a lot more adept at managing change and being prepared for that to be fluid. So a little exhibit from McKinsey's The Path to New Normal gives us an agile plan ahead process. So the first point is in effect summarising my process of going through the pestle, understanding where you're at. The second step is developing scenarios for multiple versions of your future. The third is to establish your posture and broad direction in which you're going to travel. Then determining actions and strategic moves that are robust. So we've actually planned through them and thought about those what ifs. And then we've set trigger points that drive our organisation at that point in time. So it gives us a process of thinking through and making clearer decisions. Now, it's not something that boards should be doing in isolation. It's really critical that we see in this point that there's opportunities for collaboration. And I think what has occurred is a lot of boards have said there's too much risk in that. What I'd really encourage you to think of is how could we minimise those risks? Because at the moment, there's a hell of a lot of unknowns. So my thoughts as a way of getting you to think about what could be or would be possible is to maybe take the West Australian context and say that with the borders being extremely strong, in a West Australian context, what could we be looking at? What opportunities have we got to maybe take that risk of us bunkering down and looking at more as an opportunity? And I sort of came to the view of, well, an understanding quarantine context of this. Where else could we actually look to maybe take advantage? And I sort of thought, would there be an organisation in New Zealand? Would there be an organisation in New South Wales or Queensland that we've always really wanted to work with, but probably because of the size of their organisation or their reputation, we'd never be able to actually access? Well, is now the actual perfect time for us to be approaching those organisations and looking at ways that we could collaboratively move into a process where we would give them an opportunity to work with us in an environment that they would probably never have considered previously. So it's about looking at that external environment and trying to really capitalise on it. And I think the key point here, particularly as it relates to stakeholder engagement, is really mapping out who are our stakeholders currently, but who could they be? Not necessarily who they've been in the past. And then thinking about, well, is it actually worth the engagement process to engage with them? Or is it just completely off the map? But by not thinking of that, we could be really missing opportunities for collaboration. We could be possibly missing opportunities for acquisition, or we could be missing opportunities to work in collaboration or partnership. So really it's about, and I would encourage you, I've going to send out through OSCO a number of links And there's one to a very good blog on stakeholder engagement and stakeholder mapping. And I think it's something that more organisations should include, particularly in their environmental scan when they're going through their strategic planning processes. It's something that gets you to think creatively about not just the level of engagement that we've currently got, but is that actually a process we should be thinking about disengagement rather than engagement? So again, it's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of time, energy, and effort that we've got to put into it. And recognising that for many of us, we're heavily reliant on volunteers and very heavily reliant on staff that by and large are in a part-time or contract relationship. And there is a real concern, I think, for me, where boards have in effect set management and staff unrealistic plans to achieve. So I think this gives us a really good opportunity to go back and to try and really look at those 3-month, 6-month, 12-month trigger points and to map them against those resources and really come to a common picture of, is this realistic? Now, I want you to push the envelope, but you shouldn't be burning people out for that to occur. So that's where I'd like you to reflect on that pestle and whether that E for the ethical element should be coming into that, because I think it's something really worth considering in the current context. So if I maybe put up my final slide before we move into Q&A, and that's really the quote that we've heard a lot of about never letting a good crisis go to waste. But I'd also like that to be counterpointed with the fact that with great risk comes great reward. So I think it really is the time for boards not just to plan for the future, but what have we learnt out of the last 3 months, 4 months, that we can actually use to turn into an opportunity. So boards should be viewing risk through an opportunity lens, as there's great opportunities that are actually awaiting them. And I think in that context, if you think of the sector opening back up, we're all going to be opening back up probably at very similar times. We're going to be competing against each other. So I think one of the greatest opportunities we've got at this point in time is for us to be creative about ways that we can collaborate and share and make the opening up again of something that could be across platforms or could be across states. It's something that I think we need to be a little bit more creative of rather than competing with. And I think that's a real danger for a lot of boards. So maybe, Laura, if I hand it back to you and Kevin to maybe have a look at Q&A. Kevin, I know we discussed this yesterday, but if we can't get through every question, I'm happy to commit to giving everybody who asks questions a response in one way, shape or form.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you so much for that offer, for that additional support for people. And knowing you, Pat, I know you're always so generous with your time. And again, thank you so much for sharing some thoughts with us today. So listen, we'll go into some questions. So for anyone who's got a question for Pat, please feel free to pop it into the Q&A. And like I said, make them difficult and curly because I'm trying to catch Pat out. Pat, can we start with maybe, actually, I wanted to share a quote which sort of relates to your discussion, which is a ship in a harbour is safe, but that is not what a ship has been built for, hasn't it? So it sort of made me think of that quote. But But I sort of want to maybe link it to a technical question around governance that people might have. Is first of all, can directors and can organizations trade in insolvent at the moment, given the situation that is happening? Are there, some of us might have heard of the safe harbor sort of situation. Can you just sort of give us a bit of an overview of what's the situation at the moment?
As with all contexts, and maybe all decisions that are being made in the current climate, I think if the advice I could maybe offer up is, if you are doing it for goodness and not for evil, you are probably safe. And I put probably in inverted commas there. So that's probably the get out clause for me. We have seen that those safe harbour requirements under ASIC in particular are in place, but I would be reluctant to incur a significant amount of debt. Now, I think there's technical insolvency and there's, probably breach that is significant. Now, if our best endeavours and our best intents were that we're expecting a grant to come in at a period of time and it didn't, that's a natural thing to occur in a not-for-profit context. So you probably, as such, as directors, may not be breaching those insolvency requirements. However, if you were just hoping for that and not knowing it, then that's a different question. So it comes down to really us making decisions as directors as to the probability and the likelihood of our cash flow. And at this stage, and I think we've discussed this over the years, I think one of the biggest risks, and I know it's hard to occur and develop, is for arts organisations not to have some form of reserves. And I think this current environment is the perfect example of why something like a reserves policy is worth considering. And I know people in the audience will probably jump in, my God, it's hard enough for us to stay afloat. How on earth are we going to put aside 12 months of income for that? I think what people forget is it's an aspirational policy. It's us putting a stake in the ground and saying, that rainy day is going to come one day. So let's start to build up towards it. And that's my view of that reserves policy. And I think it does reflect on that insolvency question.
Okay, we've got some questions come through. This is an anonymous question, if that's okay. How do you move a board from a hands-off advisory board to a much more active and contributing one that are opening doors for the organization? I think many of us have maybe been in this situation or will be in the future. So what's your advice around this, Pat?
Kevin, I think if we could refer people to the Australia Council's artistic framework as it relates to governance, people will notice that there's three elements and they don't sit separate. So they do overlap. And what I think that question begs is it's not a simple response. So if I was to say, what would that entail? For me, that you would have a clear purpose, that the people who come onto your board connect to that purpose, that they have clear expectations of what particularly the time that role requires, that they have clarity about the roles and relationships. And if I could put in place something that I think does need to be done, and that's that they don't come straight onto the board. that in effect they would serve one period of time, whether that's a term or a year, in a role on a subcommittee or working group, that they get to know the organisation, you get to know them, and there's a much more natural connection then for them to continue in a board role. It also requires clear induction. And what I think would really assist is that board members, in effect, start to link to the strategic plan, that some of them would naturally gravitate to one or two of the elements of that strategic plan, and that one of those would actually take on a portfolio responsibility, not to do it, but to lead it getting done. So in effect, they would then chair a working group or a subcommittee. You've got the natural connection back into the boardroom. So if any board members have any questions about it, that they can naturally respond. And I think that takes some of the burden off other board members. And I think it also helps support management and staff and volunteers. And recognising that on working groups, anyone can sit on them.
Okay, Pat, another quick question from someone saying that quite a few of the things that you've indicated today seem like a fair amount of work to do properly, and it's quite intensive thinking and work. Given a lot of boards at the moment are dealing with a range of different matters, how could how could non-executive board members sort of fit this into what is already a jam-packed sort of capacity? And sometimes board members generally being volunteered run, and if you're in regional Australia, you're most probably sitting on multiple boards. How do we answer that question, Pat? Because of course this is important work, but how do we prioritize it?
I think, as we've discussed a number of times, I think the standard model for strategic planning for a lot of organisations, not just arts organisations, is we expect the board to come to a strategic planning day. And that's where miraculously a strategic plan is going to materialise. I think we've already seen just on today's session that this isn't something that's just a one-off thing. It's something that you do need to invest time in, and hence boards need to plan for it. So I might be doing my environmental scan in, let's say, July. I might then move into my review of the mission purpose, let's say in August. I start to then look and review our key result areas September, October, which then leads into the AGM, all of that sort of element. So it's something that you need to plan for. It's something you need to invest in. But just like I said before, it doesn't mean that the board knows it all. And I think the danger is we don't spend enough time really looking at that stakeholder engagement mapping and stakeholder communication plan, because there could be things that we're currently doing that may be able to be done by someone else, and we could actually reap the rewards of that. And that sort of thinking, that board's responsible for strategy and then it needs to be implemented, but it could well be that someone else is doing that implementation for us and we still achieve our outcome.
Okay, Pat, I know that we've also talked about this a fair bit, but can I ask, how do you have, both as board directors, but also as leaders and as staff of organization, have difficult conversations with each other? What is your advice around really complex, sometimes emotionally driven conversations? What is your tips around difficult conversations in a board context?
Well, maybe this gets to the additional E in pestle, because it comes down to ethics and culture. I think we have discussed the importance of a chair, a good chair, and a good chair I'm trying to remember the quote that I heard in the UK. The culture of the boardroom should be such that I should not only be able to say what I think, but I should have the culture to say how I feel. And I reckon that's a really nuanced statement. And it's representative of the tone of the boardroom. Now, the tone of the boardroom should be able to handle challenge. And I think hand in hand with that is the really critical role for us to not only measure CEO's performance or general manager's performance, but to measure our own performance as a team. And then to pick up on those elements and actually drive it with a view to taking action and improvement. And I think if I could maybe offer those 3 questions that we've discussed a number of times, if we just asked 3 simple questions of each of our board members and then looked at collated results, what do you want the board to stop doing? What do you want the board to start doing? And what do you want the board to keep doing? I think that would be an interesting little starting point for a lot of boards to have and be able to manage those conversations.
I think that is maybe all the time we have for questions, Pat. Before we say goodbye, are there any sort of final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Look, it's probably coming back to that point of really now is not the time to be bunkering down. Now's the time to be really looking at not just one plan, but an agile plan and really considering what ifs. And I think if anything over the last weekend, I reckon it reinforces the fact that this thing is going to be very fluid and we're going to probably reinvent ourselves 5 or 6 times over the next 12 months.
Thank you so much for your time again, Pat. It was really nice spending it with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Kevin.
I'm sure everyone is also grateful. Before we say goodbye, everyone, just a quick reminder that next week there is a bunch of really exciting webinars. In fact, for the next week, there's some interesting things coming up. On Friday, we've got our first sector-led webinar with Monica Davidson from Creative Plus Business, and she will be sharing 5 practical and actionable steps in regards to marketing for artists and organizations with a focus on capacity. Also later that afternoon, our regular First Nations Roundtable conversations, and everyone is welcome to register for those conversations. They are important and critical ones to have. Next week, we are also learning about new experiences in the digital world with Think Inside the Square session. And then on Wednesday next week, back here at Creative Connections, we will be welcoming Dr. Riona Tyndall to ask us to rethink inclusive practices and what this really looks like online for access and inclusion into the future. So we look forward to those sessions. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, Pat, for your time, and also a big thank you for the Auslan interpreters helping us today. We look forward to seeing everyone next week, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks a lot.